Hello, the internet. Today we're going to do another thing where I read shit through spandex, and today the shit is my shit. It's part of the book that I am actually writing, just so you can see that it's all fair and above board, and I give myself as much crap as I give other people. Speaking of the other people, the previous chapter that I read out is by author Rini Spiru. I was actually pronouncing her name wrong, and she's since given me this right of reply that I feel I should read out. And she wants everyone to know that the Seraph Empire, Guardians of the Gateway, Part 1, is not a bodice ripper, chick lit sort of book. There's also, there's lots of other stuff going on there. There's all the different immortals and monsters and vampires and anyway, didn't want to give that impression from the chapter that I read out, but. And also, she was aware that Jeff Daniels did the Shih Tzu bullshit joke. It wasn't Jim Carrey, but Jim Carrey is more accessible as a joke. And also, Michaela's 4,000 years old, so you can't expect her to know the difference between Jeff Daniels and Jim Carrey. My parents don't know, and they're not even close to 4,000 years old. Anyway. So, the chapter I'm reading out today is a chapter that I selected at random from my next book. Not the one that's coming out soon, but the one that's coming out after that. I'm not even going to tell you the name of the book because that's going to be a surprise. The chapter is called Norrell. After the Lesser Customane counter-incursion, Special Operations Security Officer Norrell Gunton had not expected to be sucking atmosphere, let alone be in possession of all his original extremities. He'd escaped with nothing more than a patch of new skin across his shoulder and neck, courtesy of a boiling hull plate that had gone up as he was hightailing out of the compound. The fresh printed skin stung a little, as though it was still sunburned, but the doctor told him that was just the nerves underneath. "They're not in possession of all the facts," the grizzled medic had said, "and think they're still attached to burned skin. It's not psychological, not like phantom pain or anything like that. It'll go away in a day or two. Less if you go and have a few drinks." This doesn't seem like medically accurate data, but what do I know about fabricated skin grafts from the 39th century? As a result of this sage advice, and the adrenaline-charged relief at having survived the engagement at all, Norrell Gunton was currently as sloshed as the proverbial buttered bonchoon. I have no idea what that is, and to quote Chris Pratt, at this point I'm too afraid to ask. "So answer me this," he slurred at the round-faced woman with the hair sculpted into bright pink Mulran ears, who was supposedly a weapons expert. Why, he tapped the table in front of her folded arms for emphasis, "are they called missiles instead of hit-iles?" "You're sure this is the guy we want in charge of mission security?" the woman asked, with a glance at the other two humans. They were both blokes, one of them colossal and the other, well, pretty normal-sized actually, but he was sitting next to the giant Goomba, so he looked pretty small. "Goomba!" "Hey," Norrell said, wagging a finger between the bat-hair woman whose name he thought was Pentacress, and the two Astrocore guys whose names he didn't know but had a nagging suspicion he'd been told. "Hey, I'm not sure who I want... That's the eye holes. "Hey, I'm not sure I want to be part of a mission with a university ego weapons expert who doesn't know why missiles aren't called..." He wagged his finger again, scoldingly. "Missiles. You mean hit-iles," Bat-hair Pentacrest said. "No, I mean... Wait, hold on." Norrell turned his finger wag into a "one moment, please," searched the glass-crowded table, picked out one that looked pretty full, and downed the sludgy, violently spicy mixture in a mouthful. He gasped, gagged, but held it down. That was pure self-preservation. Once it hit gastric juices, you didn't want to have a molten Ildar coming back out of your mouth. It would burn your teeth down to the nerves. Ew. "Don't let his current condition fool you," the smaller Astrocore guy said. "Mr. Gunton is an exemplary security officer." Norrell raised his empty glass in salute, not quite trusting himself to speak. Whether his inability was down to the runaway emotion of the moment, or the drink still muttering and churning at the top of his gut, he wasn't sure. He also wasn't sure how this guy knew what sort of security officer he was. Presumably he'd been reading mission logs. They wrote you up in a more flattering light the closer you came to dying. Despite the fact that they were both in unmarked uniforms, he was pretty sure the big guy was a commander and the other one was a captain. They might be lieutenant and commander, respectively, but he doubted it. They had too much assurance for that. A lieutenant and a commander would be sitting rigidly in a bar like this, waiting for someone to challenge their squeaky cleanliness. Mind you, Norrell couldn't imagine anybody in their right mind challenging the giant. And if the other guy was used to hanging around with the giant, and he certainly seemed to be, then he was probably used to going unchallenged too. And the word missile comes from the word mittere in an old human language, Transient said in his sobriety-inducingly muffled voice. It means to send. True facts. Norrell looked at the Blaren fleetingly. You don't say. Transient Fear Terminal Bravery was sitting at the end of the table, his armour-plated lower forearms resting in a puddle of spilled beer. It was hard to tell whether he was just wearing an exoskeleton or if he actually had robotics implanted in his limbs, and it didn't really matter. His head was his most distinctive feature. Transient had a vertical green dome instead of a face. It pushed the flat upper part of his skull up into a brow-like arch in the front, and filled out the pale wedge of his face from cheeks to small molanoid chin. It was as if someone had embedded a tungo-tungo ball in his skull. See, now, what the fuck is a tungo-tungo ball? Now you've got drongo ball, jenki ball, and tungo-tungo. I know you have no respect for sports and the people who play and enjoy sport, but you can stop making up stupid names for sci-fi sports that you have no intention of ever explaining, please and thank you. Norrell didn't know if Transient Fear Terminal Bravery still had a face behind the bubble, and he didn't want to know. He didn't know which was the more horrifying alternative. The dome glowed softly, turning his head into an eerie spotlight, and it was translucent, misty. The green inside swirled, and there was something shadowy inside the shifting mists. It could have been an image he'd programmed to play across the surface of the bubble, but Norrell didn't think it was. Transient was... Well, Norrell wasn't sure what he was, except he was a Blaren. A real Blaren. One of the bad ones. The ones people like to forget about when Amolran talked about the criminal subspecies and everyone rolled their eyes because Blaren weren't that bad really. Transient was the sort the Amolran meant. Well, if you vouch for him, Pentacrest said. Oh, absolutely, I'll vouch the shoey out of him. Consider him vouched for, the messy-haired officer said. Above reproach and in unthinkable excess of expectations. It's the unthinkable excess I'm worried about, said Pentacrest. I'm quite happy to put my life in his hands, Transient said from somewhere in the ghastly green depths of his globe face. Any human who drinks Ildars like that is clearly unkillable. That's the spirit, Chief Tactical, the smaller officer congratulated the gleaming armour-plated Blaren. That's your Chief Tactical Officer? Norrell pointed a sticky finger at Transient. Can we possibly not reveal too many mission-critical details to the drunk man who has yet to sign on to our crew? The big bastard said in a pained voice. Tish and pish to your snide insinuations, Commander Barducci, the smaller Astrocore guy said. Tish and pish. Classic. Besides, there's not going to be any booze on the way to the core. Oh, for fuck's sake, Skell, Commander Barducci snapped. See, this is why we need a security officer, the higher-ranking officer. Skell, apparently, carried on blithely. You're going into the core on a mission, Norrell said, with a choreographically inclined sewage specialist as your Chief Tactical, and this pair of circus freaks as your XO and weapons expert. He waved a hand at Barducci and Pentacrest. And you're recruiting in dick punches? We also need to talk about the names you give to bars. He's a born diplomat, Pentacrest enthused, with what Norrell suspected was sarcasm. Actually, we're not in dick punches, Barducci said. You got thrown out of dick punches about 2 hours ago. We followed you to this place. Norrell squinted around. What is this place? I don't know, but if one more person tells me they don't serve status lamps in here, I'm going to start pulling gonads off, Transient growled. Norrell guffawed, tried to stifle it, then guffawed some more. That was what the eerie fucker looked like. A green-lit status lamp, with arms. Gonad off-pulling arms. He hiccuped, then wished he hadn't. The name on the sign said, Under construction, use other door, Pentacrest said. Read. Not said. The name on the sign read. Never mind. And we've been here how many hours? Norrell squeaked, feeling every sphincter in his body, even a bunch of the involuntary internal ones, clenched tight enough to hurt. Also not sure if medically a thing. Under construction was not the sort of place you went to alone. It occurred to him foggily that he should probably try to be nicer to his new crewmates. They might be his only ticket to getting out of under construction that wasn't one way to the nearest recycling plant. Or, if half of what he'd heard about this bar was true, the kitchens. Fun behind-the-scenes note here. The author originally intended to write, they might just be his only ticket out of under construction that didn't get tied around his big toe, or something like that. But he didn't think bodies would get toe tagged in the 39th century, so here we are. Cannibalism's still on, though, apparently. Even more foggily, it occurred to Norrell Gunton that he'd just thought of the 4 freaks arranged around his table as his new crewmates. And we're only recruiting here because it's where you were, Skell said. Who are you? Captain from Skelliglyph, the captain said. Fuck. I sort of hoped I would never have to say that name out loud. I think the author planned it that way. Commander from Skelliglyph, the captain said, and gestured at the Colossus. Commander Drago Barducci. Perhaps if we tell you enough times, it'll stick. You didn't tell me before. He's told you at least 4 times, Pentacrest almost shouted. Well, Norrell grumbled. Well, what sort of a name is Scallywag anyway? And now we're going to try to lampshade every humorous mispronunciation of this name just to get it out of the way. At least you're actually being recruited. I didn't get to volunteer, Barducci said moodily. I said something unflattering about Admiral Haney without realising I was talking to Admiral Haney, and next thing I knew I was on the crew. Hardly seemed fair. How was I supposed to know he'd be attending an Academy reunion? Haney owed me a favour, Skell said. He'd still be patrolling the Hubris demilitarised zone if it wasn't for me. If he gets to reinforce his reputation at the same time? Anyway, don't tell me you haven't enjoyed our missions. I didn't get to volunteer, Pentacrest protested. You guys told me too much right from the start, so it was fly or bust. And you want to fly to the... Norrell lowered his voice. Fly to the C-O-R-E with me? Did he just spell core to keep it secret? Pentacrest asked. What kind of a security officer? Actually, it's probably the perfect security measure for this place, Transient said. Come on, Skellington, what's the mission? Norrell demanded. And there we go, Skellington. We're going to fly into the middle of Demorikine territory, the captain said. We're going to find the gates of space, and we're going to shout, Hello, is there anybody in there? Into them. I like this mission's elegant simplicity, Norrell congratulated him. Too many moving parts, Skell said with a sage nod. That's how good plans get ruined. Who gets to shout? We're in negotiations to get a special comms guru to do the shouting for us, Skell said. Can I shout? Formidable though your spelling expertise may be, the captain said. No. I'm getting a planet named after myself, Pentacrest added. Norrell pointed at her. I want a planet. Oh, now, having read Blaren, I'm sad. We're just naming the planet, Skell protested. You don't get to keep it. No more planets, Barducci growled and jabbed a thick finger at Norrell. You're Astrocore, he said, which means you just have to do as you're told. Bummer. I'm not Astrocore, Transient said, raising one of his gleaming upper hands. Do I get a planet named after me? We're not calling a planet Transient Fear Terminal Bravery, Skell said. You could do worse, Astro, Transient remarked. No more planets, Barducci repeated stubbornly. Guys, Norrell said, delicately beginning to move glasses aside, clearing a space in front of him, his movements random and anxious, but with a vague notion of pushing himself upright without knocking anything over and getting himself killed. This is all great, but Mrs. Gunton will be very cross with me if, having just gotten back alive from Lesser Castamane, I was to ship out on a special operation to parts unknown before even sobering up. Oh, you'll have time to sober up, Barducci promised. I understand your wife goes by her Estelle family name, Skell said, following the Casberti tradition. Oh, now you're just making shit up. Yeah, you're all very clever and you read my file, Norrell said, looking around. The bar seemed peaceful. Peaceful was bad. I was talking about my daughter, Pilar. She got married while I was on Lesser Castamane. I haven't actually seen her since I got back. Had to see a few bottles first, Pentacrest asked snidely. I deduce you have no practical combat experience, Transient said to her, not unkindly. Some unpacking is often necessary in order to return one's head to a peaceful social context. See, I don't think you have any practical combat experience either, but then neither do I. So maybe you should all just make sure that, you know what, forget it. Just make sure that the reader knows that this guy is an alien, and you're not making assumptions about human soldiers because you don't know anything about them. Also, Gunton might just be a rummy. Anyway. I deduce you have no personal practical combat experience, Transient said to her, not unkindly. Some unpacking is often necessary in order to return one's head to a peaceful social context. At least that's how it is for Blaren. See, it's that easy. I further deduce that you don't have kids, Norrell told Pentacrest jokingly, not wanting to picture Transient unpacking his head. Same basic rule. Transient inclined his lamp face in acknowledgement of the zinger. Okay, you're all going to get along fine, Barducci said. We have orders and comms here, Mr. Gunton. Dr. Estelle has shipped out on the Blue Crow Chrysanthemum on a 10-year haul to Declipatorian and back. The plan was, I understand, to meet her there. And your daughter is back on the A-hole. She was involved in the Imperial Guards, that whole legal hootenanny. A 5-year jag to the... Skell squinted side to side with what Norrell felt was unwarranted conspiratoriality. C-O-R-E. Won't hardly make a dent in your family reunion plans. Norrell squinted. Guess you guys have it all planned out. We try, Barducci said. A good plan is central to doing things and not getting killed, Skell added. Speaking of not getting killed... Fine, he glanced around at the bar again and saw that it had emptied, aside from a few patrons of the even less pleasant variety, who were no longer paying attention to their drinks the way they should be. If there's any more debriefing to be done, we should probably do it a long way from here. You probably mean briefing? I think you debrief after you, well, you know, like I said, no knowledge of this really, but it seems briefing. Don't worry, Skell said, pushing himself to his feet and raising his voice. Do you have a toilet? He asked the shadowy Mollerinoid figure behind the bar, or do you just want me to piss into your kegs like everyone else does? Oh, fuck me, Norrell said weakly, pushing back his chair and reaching for a weapon he would have brought with him if he'd known he was going to get drunk stumble into under construction. Relax, Skell reassured him, tugging his core-issue coat off the back of his chair and shaking it with offensive fastidiousness. 3 more massive figures, Blaren with lurid phosphorescent death masks, stepped away from the bar and collapsed. With a series of heavy slither crashes and the tinkle of breaking glass, the remaining under-construction patrons folded to the filth-encrusted floor, some of them by way of injurious head impacts with equally disgusting furniture. Skell smiled. Let me introduce you to our pilot. The door swung open and the vast refrigerator-clad shape of an Achydrednath eased herself sideways into the silent, dingy bar. She straightened and seemed to expand to fill the end of the room, and held up her hands. One open to show 4 great spread fingers, the other showing a single digit. Norrell, confused and still steaming drunk despite the load of panic adrenaline that had recently been dumped into his bloodstream. You mean adrenaline. There's no such thing as adrenaline. Looked at the others. Transient was standing with both pairs of great metal arms folded, but the humans were grinning. Each of them was holding up 6 fingers like it was some sort of code. Did you tell me the whole secret handshake thing and I forgot? Norrell asked. Don't look at me, Transient replied with a shrug. That, Norrell thought, as they stumbled out of the bar, was probably going to be a tall order over the next half a decade, but he'd give it his best shot. That's the end of the chapter. I'm going to stop there because I think I've been going on for long enough, and, you know, I don't really have much to say about this chapter anyway. So, look forward to getting Molran, Book 6 of the Final Fall of Man series, coming out within the next month or so. And then this one is well and truly underway. So check out my progress on the blog as you go. Bye.